I would absolutely love to read this story to you this evening on Easter Sunday. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to join me. Yay! Yay! I'm getting the thumbs up from my husband. I can see that there are 4 of you watching. I can see myself live on Facebook. Fabulous. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone, as we got these small kinks ironed out. Happy Easter. I hope that you've all had a wonderful Easter Sunday with your family. If you are watching on our Facebook page, then you have the opportunity to comment and say hello to me this evening. I would love to know what you were up to this Sunday. How did you spend your day? Oh, good. Everybody is messaging me. Messages are flooding into my phone that I just came on. Very good. I was supposed to be here live at 7. I did attempt twice, and we were not getting connected, and now we're live. Wonderful. So if you're here, comment on Facebook. Let me know what you did today to celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, today. We had a wonderful time worshiping with you on the live stream. Wasn't that just an encouraging service? We loved it. We loved worshiping and being reminded of our great Savior who died for us in our place to take away our sin, and then he rose again to show that he is victorious over sin and death, and we will one day live with him forever and have resurrected bodies just like him. So thank you, Jesus, for dying for us. We're so grateful that our Savior is alive today and that we can worship him. So welcome to Storytime with me. I see some of you are here. Hello, Evelyn. Hello, Jet and Pierce. Happy Easter, Rubinettes. Wonderful. Thanks for your patience. So before I dive into chapter 5 and 6 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I want to do a little recap with you. If you're joining for the first time, this will be a great help for you, but it was also a week since we were together last, so we may all need a little reminder of where we are at in the story. So in the beginning of this book, we met Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. And Lucy entered through a wardrobe into the land of Narnia, and she met a wonderful fawn named Tumnus. But when she came back through the wardrobe to meet her brothers and sister, they didn't believe her, did they? It is rather hard to believe that she entered another land through a wardrobe. But then in chapters 3 and 4, her brother Edmund also stepped through the wardrobe with her, and he met somebody in the land of Narnia. If you remember who he met, please type that in to the Facebook chat for me. Who did Edmund meet when he stepped through the wardrobe? Yes, if you said the White Witch, you are right. He met the White Witch, and she gave him some enchanted Turkish delight, and she told him something very, very important to our story. She told Edmund that she wanted him to bring his 2 sisters and his brother back into Narnia and to her palace. And she promised Edmund something, right? She promised him more Turkish delight, which he didn't know was enchanted. And she promised that she would make him a prince. So where we pick up our story in chapter 5 is where Edmund and Lucy have found each other in Narnia, and they're stepping back into the wardrobe. So I'm going to pick up with the last line of chapter 4. "Come on then," said Lucy. "Let's find the others. What a lot we shall have to tell them, and what wonderful adventures we shall have now that we're all in it together." Chapter 5, back on this side of the door. Because the game of hide and seek was still going on, it took Edmund and Lucy some time to find the others. But when at last they were all together, which happened in the long room where the suit of armor was, Lucy burst out, "Peter, Susan, it's all true. Edmund has seen it too. There is a country you can get into through the wardrobe. Edmund and I both got in. We met one another in there, in the wood. Go on, Edmund. Tell them all about it. What's all this about, Ed? Said Peter. And now we come to one of the nastiest things in this story. Up to that moment, Edmund had been feeling sick and sulky and annoyed with Lucy for being right. But he hadn't made up his mind what to do. When Peter suddenly asked him the question, he decided all at once to do the meanest and most spiteful thing he could think of. He decided to let Lucy down. Tell us, Ed, said Susan. And Edmund gave a very superior look, as if he were far older than Lucy. There was really only a year's difference. And then a little snicker and said, Oh, yes. Lucy and I have been playing, pretending that all her story about a country in the wardrobe was true. Just for fun, of course. There's nothing there, really. Poor Lucy gave Edmund one look and rushed out of the room. Edmund, who was becoming a nastier person every minute, thought that he had scored a great success. And he went on at once to say, There she goes again. What's the matter with her? That's the worst of young kids. They always... Look here, said Peter, turning on him savagely. Be quiet. You've been perfectly beastly to Lou ever since she started this nonsense about the wardrobe. And now you go playing games with her about it and setting her off again. I believe you did it simply out of spite. But it's all nonsense, said Edmund, very taken aback. Of course it's all nonsense, said Peter. That's just the point. Lou was perfectly all right when we left home, but since we've been down here, she seems to be either going queer in the head or else turning into a most frightful liar. But whichever it is, what good do you think you'll do by jeering and nagging at her one day and encouraging her the next? I thought, said Edmund, but he couldn't think of anything to say. You didn't think at all, said Peter. It's just spite. You've always liked being beastly to anyone smaller than yourself. We've seen that at school before now. Do stop it, said Susan. It won't make things any better having a row between you two. Let's go and find Lucy. It was not surprising that when they found Lucy, a good deal later, everyone could see that she had been crying. Nothing they could say to her made any difference. She stuck to her story and said, I don't care what you think, and I don't care what you say. I can tell the professor, or you can write to Mother, or you can do anything you like, because I've met a fawn in there, and I wish I'd stayed there, and you are all beasts. It was an unpleasant evening. Lucy was miserable, and Edmund was beginning to feel that his plan wasn't working as well as he had expected. The two older ones were really beginning to think that Lucy was out of her mind. They stood in the passage talking about it in whispers long after she had gone to bed. The result was the next morning, they decided that they really would go and tell the whole thing to the professor. He'll write to Father, and if he thinks there is really something wrong with Lou, said Peter, it's getting beyond us. So they went, and they knocked at the study door. And the professor said, Come in, and got up and found chairs for them and said he was quite at their disposal. Then he sat listening to them with the tips of his fingers pressed together and never interrupting till they had finished the whole story. After that, he said nothing for quite a long time. Then he cleared his throat and said the last thing either of them expected. Hello, Clark family. Hello, Mavara and AJ. What do you think the professor is going to say? Does anybody have any idea? It says that he said the last thing either of them expected. Let's find out. How do you know, he asked, that your sister's story is not true? Oh, but, began Susan, and then stopped. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious. Then Susan pulled herself together and said, but Edmund said that they had only been pretending. That is a point, said the professor, which certainly deserves consideration, very careful consideration. For instance, if you will excuse me for asking the question, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as more reliable? I mean, which is the more truthful? Well, that's just the funny thing about it, sir, said Peter. Up till now, I'd have said Lucy every time. And what do you think, my dear? Said the professor, turning to Susan. Well, said Susan, in general, I'd say the same as Peter. But this couldn't be true, all this about the wood and the fawn. That is more than I know, said the professor. And a charge of lying against someone whom you have always found truthful is a very serious thing. A very serious thing indeed. We were afraid it mightn't even be lying, said Susan. We thought there might be something wrong with Lucy. Madness, you mean, said the professor quite coolly. Madness, what does he mean by madness? Well, he doesn't mean that Lucy is angry. Madness is another word for somebody who's not in their right mind. Their thinking has gone crazy. This is what Peter and Lucy are wondering. Oh, you can make your minds easy about that. One has only to look at her and talk to her and see she is not mad. But then, said Susan, and stopped. She had never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the professor and didn't know what to think. Logic, said the professor half to himself. Why don't they teach logic at these schools? There are only 3 possibilities. Either your sister is telling lies, or she is mad, or she is telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it is obvious that she is not mad. For the moment, then, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume she is telling the truth. Susan looked at him very hard and was quite sure from the expression on his face that he was not making fun of them. But how could it be true, sir? Said Peter. Why do you say that? Said the professor. Well, for one thing, said Peter, if it were real, why doesn't everybody find this country every time they go to the wardrobe? I mean, there was nothing there when we looked. Even Lucy didn't pretend there was. What has that to do with it? Said the professor. Well, sir, if things are real, they're there all the time. Are they? Said the professor. and Peter did not know quite what to say. "But there was no time," said Susan. Lucy had no time to go anywhere, even if there was such a place. She came running after us the very moment we were out of the room. It was less than a minute, and she pretended to have been away for hours. That is very true. That is the very thing that makes her story so likely to be true, said the professor. If there really is a door in this house that leads to some other world, and I should warn you that this is a very strange house, and even I know very little about it. If I say she got into another world, I should not at all be surprised to find that the other world had a separate time of its own, so that however long you stayed there, it would never take up any of our time. On the other hand, I don't think many girls of her age would invent an idea for themselves. That idea for themselves. If she had been pretending, she would have hidden for a reasonable time before coming out and telling her story. But do you really mean, sir, said Peter, that there could be other worlds all over the place, just around the corner, like that? Nothing is more probable, said the professor, taking off his spectacles and beginning to polish them while he muttered to himself, I wonder what they do teach these days in schools. But what are we to do? Said Susan. She felt that the conversation was beginning to get off the point. My dear young lady, said the professor, suddenly looking up with a very sharp expression at both of them. There is one plan which no one has yet suggested, and which is well worth trying. What's that? Said Susan. We might all try minding our own business, he said. And that was the end of that conversation. After this, things were a good deal better for Lucy. Peter saw to it that Edmund stopped jeering at her, and neither she nor anyone else felt inclined to talk about the wardrobe at all. It had become a rather alarming subject. And so, for a time, it looked as if all the adventures were coming to an end. But that was not to be. The house of the professors, which even he knew so little about, was so old and famous that people from all over England used to come and ask permission to see over it. It was the sort of house that is mentioned in guidebooks and even in histories. And well it might be, for all manner of stories were told about it, some of them even stranger than the one I am telling you now. And when parties of sightseers arrived and asked to see the house, the professor always gave them permission, and Mrs. Macready, the housekeeper, showed them round, telling them about the pictures and the armor and the rare books in the library. Mrs. Macready was not fond of children and did not like to be interrupted when she was telling visitors all the things she knew. Here's a picture that I forgot to show you on the other side of the page. There's the professor speaking to Peter and Susan. And here's the house with some of the sightseers coming to see it. Mrs. Macready was not fond of children and did not like to be interrupted when she was telling visitors all the things she knew. She had said to Susan and Peter almost on the first morning, along with a good many other instructions, and please remember you're to keep out of the way whenever I'm taking a party over the house. Just as if any of us would want to waste half the morning trailing round with a crowd of strange grown-ups, said Edmund. and the other three thought the same. That was how the adventures began for the second time. A few mornings later, Peter and Edmund were looking at the suit of armor and wondering if they could take it to bits when the two girls rushed into the room and said, "Look out! Here comes the Macready and a whole gang with her." "Sharp's the word," said Peter, and all four made off through the door at the far end of the room. But when they had got out into the green room and beyond it, into the library, they suddenly heard voices ahead of them and realized that Mrs. Macready must be bringing her party of sightseers up the back stairs instead of up the front stairs as they had expected. And after that, whether it was that they lost their heads, or that Mrs. Macready was trying to catch them, or that some magic in the house had come to life and was chasing them into Narnia, they seemed to find themselves being followed everywhere, until at last Susan said, "Oh, bother these trippers. Here, let's get into the wardrobe room till they've passed. No one will follow us in there." But the moment they were inside, they heard voices in the passage, and then someone fumbling at the door. And then they saw the handle turning. "Quick!" said Peter. "There's nowhere else," and flung open the wardrobe. All four of them bundled inside it and sat there, panting in the dark. Peter held the door closed but did not shut it, for, of course, he remembered, as every sensible person does, that you should never, never shut yourself in a wardrobe. Chapter 6, Into the Forest. Where do you think they're all headed now? "I wish the Macready would hurry up and take all these people away," said Susan presently. "I'm getting horribly cramped." "And what a filthy smell of camphor," said Edmund. "I expect the pockets of these coats are full of it," said Susan, "to keep away the moths." "There's something sticking into my back," said Peter. "And isn't it cold?" said Susan. "Now that you mention it, it is cold," said Peter. "And hang it all, it's wet too. What's the matter with this place? I'm sitting on something wet. It's getting wetter every minute." He struggled to his feet. "Let's get out," said Edmund. "They're gone." "Oh!" said Susan suddenly, and everyone asked her what was the matter. "I'm sitting against a tree," said Susan. "And look, it's getting light over there." "By Jove, you're right," said Peter. "And look there, and there, it's trees all round. And this wet stuff is snow. Why, I do believe we've got into Lucy's wood after all." And now there was no mistaking it, and all four children stood blinking in the daylight of a winter day. Behind them were coats hanging on pegs. In front of them were snow-covered trees. Peter turned at once to Lucy. "I apologize for not believing you," he said. "I'm sorry. Will you shake hands?" "Of course," said Lucy, and did. "And now," said Susan, "what do we do next?" "Do?" said Peter. "Why, go and explore the wood, of course." "Ugh," said Susan, stamping her feet. "It's pretty cold. What about putting on some of these coats?" "They're not ours," said Peter doubtfully. "I am sure nobody would mind," said Susan. "It isn't as if we wanted to take them out of the house. We shan't take them even out of the wardrobe." "I never thought of that, Sue," said Peter. "Of course, now that you put it that way, I see. No one could say you have bagged a coat as long as you leave it in the wardrobe where you found it. And I suppose this whole country is in the wardrobe." They immediately carried out Susan's very sensible plan. The coats were rather too big for them, so that they came down to their heels and looked more like royal robes than coats when they had put them on. But they all felt a good deal warmer, and each thought the others looked better in their new get-ups and more suitable to the landscape. "We can pretend we are Arctic explorers," said Lucy. "This is going to be exciting enough without pretending," said Peter, as he began leading the way forward into the forest. There were heavy, darkish clouds overhead, and it looked as if there might be more snow before night. "I say," began Edmund presently, "oughtn't we be bearing a bit more to the left? That is, if we're aiming for the lamppost." He had forgotten for a moment that he must pretend never to have been in the wood before. The moment the words were out of his mouth, he realized that he had given himself away. Everyone stopped. Everyone stared at him. Peter whistled. "So, you really were here," he said. "That time Lou said she'd met you here, and you made out she was telling lies." There was dead silence. "Well, of all the poisonous little beasts," said Peter, and shrugged his shoulders and said no more. There seemed, indeed, no more to say, and presently the four resumed their journey. But Edmund was saying to himself, "I'll pay you all out for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs." "Where are we going anyway?" said Susan, chiefly for the sake of changing the subject. "I think Lou ought to be the leader," said Peter. "Goodness knows she deserves it. Where will you take us, Lou?" "What about going to see Mr. Tumnus?" said Lucy. "He's the nice fawn I told you about." Everyone agreed to this, and off they went, walking briskly and stamping their feet. Lucy proved to be a good leader. At first, she wondered whether she would be able to find the way, but she recognized an odd-looking tree on one place and a stump in another, and brought them on to where the ground became uneven and into the little valley, and at last to the very door of Mr. Tumnus's cave. But there, a terrible surprise awaited them. The door had been wrenched off its hinges and broken to bits. Inside, the cave was dark and cold and had the damp feel and smell of a place that had not been lived in for several days. Snow had drifted in from the doorway and was heaped on the floor, mixed with something black, which turned out to be the charred sticks and ashes from the fire. Someone had apparently flung it about the room and then stamped it out. The crockery lay smashed on the floor, and the picture of the fawn's father had been slashed into shreds with a knife. "This is a pretty good washout," said Edmund. "Not much good coming here." "What is this?" said Peter, stooping down. He had just noticed a piece of paper which had been nailed through the carpet to the floor. "Is there anything written on it?" asked Susan. "Yes, I think there is," answered Peter. "But I can't read it in this light. Let's get out into the open air." They all went out into the daylight and crowded round Peter as he read out the following words. "The former occupant of these premises, the fawn Tumnus, is under arrest and awaiting his trial on the charge of high treason against her Imperial Majesty, Jadis, Queen of Narnia, Chatelaine of Cair Paravel, Empress of the Lone Islands, etc. Also of comforting her said enemies, her said Majesty's enemies, harboring spies and fraternizing with humans. Signed, Maugrim, Captain of the Secret Police. Long live the Queen. The children stared at each other. I don't know that I'm going to like this place after all, said Susan. Who is this Queen, Lou? Said Peter. Do you know anything about her? She isn't a real queen at all, answered Lucy. She's a horrible witch, the White Witch. Everyone, all the wood people, hate her. She has made an enchantment over the whole country so that it's always winter here and never Christmas. I wonder if there's any point in going on, said Susan. I mean, it doesn't seem particularly safe here, and it looks as if not much fun either. And it's getting colder every minute, and we've brought nothing to eat. What about just going home? Oh, but we can't, said Lucy suddenly. Don't you see? We can't just go home, not after this. It is all on my account that the poor fawn has got into this trouble. He hid me from the witch, and he showed me the way back. That's what it means by comforting the Queen's enemies and fraternizing with humans. We simply must try to rescue him. A lot we can do, said Edmund, when we haven't got anything to eat. Oh, be quiet, you, said Peter, who was still very angry with Edmund. What do you think, Susan? I have a horrid feeling that Lou is right, said Susan. I don't want to go a step further, and I wish we'd never come. But I think we must try to do something for Mr. whatever his name is. I mean, the fawn. That's what I feel too, said Peter. I'm worried about having no food with us. I'd vote for going back and getting something from the larder. Only there doesn't seem to be any certainty of getting back into this country again once you've got out of it. I think we'll have to go on. So do I, said both the girls. If only we knew where the poor chap was imprisoned, said Peter. They were all still wondering what to do next when Lucy said, Look, there's a robin with such a red breast. It's the first bird I've seen here. I say, I wonder, can birds talk in Narnia? It almost looks as if it wanted to say something to us. Then she turned to the robin and said, Please, can you tell us where Tumnus the fawn has been taken to? As she said this, she took a step forward toward the bird. It at once flew away, but only as far as to the next tree. There it perched, and it looked at them very hard, as if it understood all that they had been saying. Almost without noticing that they had done so, the four children went a step or two nearer to it. At this, the robin flew away again to the next tree and once more looked at them very hard. You couldn't have found a robin with a redder chest or a brighter eye. Do you know, said Lucy, I really believe he means us to follow him. I've an idea he does, said Susan. What do you think, Peter? Well, we might as well try it, answered Peter. The robin appeared to understand the matter thoroughly. It kept going from tree to tree, always a few yards ahead of them, but always so near that they could easily follow it. In this way, it led them on slightly downhill. Wherever the robin alighted, a little shower of snow would fall off the branch. Presently, the clouds parted overhead, and the winter sun came out, and the snow all around them grew dazzlingly bright. They had been traveling in this way for about half an hour, with the two girls in front, when Edmund said to Peter, "If you're not still too high and mighty to talk to me, I've something to say which you'd better listen to." "What is it?" asked Peter. "Hush, not so loud," said Edmund. "There's no good frightening the girls. But have you realized what we're doing?" "What?" said Peter, lowering his voice to a whisper. "We're following a guide we know nothing about. How do we know which side that bird is on? Why shouldn't it be leading us into a trap?" "That's a nasty idea. Still, a robin, you know, they're good birds in all the stories I've read. I'm sure a robin wouldn't be on the wrong side." "If it comes to that, which is the right side? How do we know that the fawns are in the right and the queen, yes, I know that we've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong? We don't really know anything about either. The fawn saved Lucy. He said he did, but how do we know? And there's another thing too. Has anyone the least idea of the way home from here?" "Great Scott," said Peter. "I hadn't thought of that." "And there's no chance of dinner either," said Edmund. And there's a picture of the beautiful robin with the bright red tummy. And that is the end of chapter 6. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I know it's Easter Sunday, and I even had a few people ask, are you going to read something Easter related tonight? And I wanted to end and close with this. The story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is in fact almost an Easter story in itself. We haven't got there yet in the story, but I want you to keep your ears open for clues in the book that it really is an Easter story. And as we get there, further along in the chapters, I'm actually going to ask you guys why you think The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is actually an Easter book. So thank you to everybody who joined me. I know we went a little later tonight because we got started a little later, so I hope that you made it to the end and now you are ready to head off to bed with your family. If you're still on Facebook Live, comment. Let me know what was your favorite part of the story this evening. And make sure you tune in next Sunday, 7 p.m., where we're going to continue the story together. Thanks, everybody. Have a happy Easter. Good night.